For about as long as we've had cinema, we've had the Western genre, and undoubtedly tied to the Western genre is the cowboy character. The genre had widespread appeal in American cinema, leading to a golden age of Western films spanning from the late 1930s through to the 1960s. These films would cement many of the Western stereotypes that culturally still linger in our minds today, and the cowboy quickly became a shorthand for independence, hard work, self-reliance, masculinity, and heroicism. But this left the character open for an analysis of these qualities and an exploration of its underlying shortcomings, such as repressed emotions, pride, and naivety. This has given rise to the subgenre of queer Western films, in which queer themes are presented alongside and intertwined with traditionally Western tropes. The latest example of this is Jane Campion's film, The Power of the Dog. So why does the gay cowboy trope keep popping up in cinema? And what do we learn from the intersectionality of queer identities and the cowboy character?
Gun you were about to use back there. Can I see it? Maybe you'd like to see mine.
Before proceeding, I thought that it would be best to clarify how I'm using the term Western very liberally. A true Western has a specific location and time period in which it is set. The American Film Institute defines a Western as set in the American West and embodies the spirit, the struggle, and the demise of the new frontier. However, the films I'm very liberally labeling as Western do not follow that definition. They merely have the flavors of a Western film. Similarly, I'm applying the same principle to cowboys, opening up the character and Western genre to be analyzed on a broader scale.
Anna, so you know somebody named Jack? So you got a postcard. Is he somebody you cowboyed with, or what?
Like many other male-dominated groups such as sailors and leather biker gangs, cowboys have become icons to the trope of the macho or manly gay, in which a character is queer and exhibits little to no feminine traits, and engages in what is seen as extremely manly activities. The truth of gay cowboys, however, is not based far from reality. Aside from the fact that gay people can be found anywhere and everywhere, queer people in the American West has actually been documented. The Autry Museum of the American West even did a series in 2009/2010 called Out West, which highlighted the LGBTQIA+ history. However, it's important to note that the label of homosexuality is a fairly new term in comparison to history, a term newer than the American West. Peter Bogue from the University of Colorado at Boulder was quoted in True West magazine as saying, "Society didn't really designate people as homosexual or heterosexual through most of the 19th century. It was not really until the 20th century that those identities crystallized." But the stories of queer cowboys goes beyond mere representation, as in the context of their films, the character can critique broader aspects of society. Essentially, after the frontier came to an end, the cowboy was romanticized in culture and raised to represent the ideal man, exuding skill, confidence, masculinity, and a hint of mystery. And although cowboy types are seen in other countries around the world, the character has a strong connection to the American identity, being up there with apple pies and baseball. The American Cowboy magazine once asked themselves the question of why America needs the cowboy, to which they answered, "Every culture needs legends and heroes. The cowboy is one of America's best. We see honor, hard work, strength, and freedom in the cowboy. We envy the simplicity of his long day's labor and the wide open spaces he roams. Little boys want to grow up to be him, and many little girls want to grow up and marry him. He contains the last vestiges of wilderness allowed in the new millennium, and as much as our country changes, he remains the same. America needs the cowboy both to remind us of how far we have come and to bring us back to the simplicity of the values he represents. This quote highlights several defining features of what the cowboy represents culturally, and to think critically of the cowboy is to think critically of everything the stereotype has come to represent. We can see that primarily masculinity shines through, which in Western society is traditionally strength, courage, assertiveness, etc. But in the definition also lies conservatism, freedom, and Americana. Presenting a cowboy as being queer automatically places the character into a sphere of otherness when it comes to each of these defining features. This allows these themes to be dissected and analyzed through the guise of the queer lens. By juxtaposing the queer identity with these characteristics, it not only invites criticism and reinterpretations of these attributes, but in turn works at integrating the queer identity into these folds of mainstream society. One of the largest traits attributed to the cowboy is their masculinity. The definition lifts the cowboy character up to a legendary and heroic status, something that boys should aspire to be, and this is supported by its depictions in pop culture. This sense of ultramasculinity that runs within the DNA of the character is what has contributed to the character being symbolic of the macho gay. The cowboy being symbolic of the macho gay is best seen in the disco group The Village People, which is made up of characters that are symbols of American masculinity and macho gay fantasies. Among the cowboy in the disco group are other symbols of this trope, such as the policeman, the construction worker, the Native American, the leatherman, and the soldier. Even though gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation are widely accepted as distinct concepts, given the fact that homosexuality has long been attributed with effeminacy, casting the cowboy in a queer light forces audiences to not only question society's standards of masculinity, but to highlight the trap that can come from toxic masculinity, which are the culturally accepted norms of masculinity that end up hurting society and the men who exhibit these traits. Given that the cowboy is tied to a specific place and time, there is an inherent conservatism that comes along with the character. Especially in the American Cowboys magazine definition of a cowboy, there is a strong sense of things being better back then, and that the world has lost touch with the time in which America was great. The cowboy is suspended in a bygone era of a simpler time, not one plagued by the many pitfalls of modern society, and thus becomes emblematic of simpler times. However, a queer cowboy embodies both of the two seemingly opposing ideas in the body of one character. In the introduction chapter of the book Queer Ecologies, it is theorized that the assertion of heterosexual, masculine, and conservative identities being associated with the wilderness was a way of explicitly going against the progressive urban specter of the queer. But entangling these two identities into one creates a compelling character on film to watch navigate through both urban and rural spaces. The cowboy's path isn't controlled or restricted by his job, but rather is supported by the cowboy lifestyle for exploration and journey. Thomas L. Grigsby, writer of Symbols, Values, and the Cowboy Myth, said, "The rancher takes pride in his isolation and counts the inconvenience of the often impassable roads and great distances as a fair price to pay for the freedom to do as he wants." However, there is a natural and cinematically compelling irony at play in the presentation of a gay cowboy, as the physical freedom they experience in their environment contrasts the emotional prison within their soul.
I wish I knew how to quit you.
Then why don't you?
The last characteristic highlighted as being linked with the cowboy is Americana, which is the cultural artifacts linked to the history, geography, folklore, and heritage of the United States of America. These are sometimes brands and other times are symbols, like the cowboy, and sometimes they're both. As previously mentioned, of course ranchers can be found around the world, But since the symbolism of the cowboy was solidified in US film and TV, the stereotype and what it represents is forever tied to the United States. And while gradually becoming more accepting of queer persons, given that cowboys are often found in bygone eras, a gay cowboy would be seen as going against the acceptable standards for men at the time. However, as mentioned earlier, queer cowboys have been present and documented all throughout history, and while the gay cowboy genre may present as work that subverts the trope of the cowboy and challenges the ideas in which it represents, it also works towards recontextualizing film history to being more in line with the actual truth of the character's past. The gay cowboy may not be the most prolific trope in cinema, but it's important to remember that tropes are tools, and the interesting and dynamic intersectionality of queer persons and the cowboy character allows for both representation and an interesting analysis of several key aspects of society, as well as a means of integrating them into the mainstream. Exploring the cowboy through the queer lens creates an entry point for thought-provoking cinema that can push topics and the discourse into greater regions of depth, and this is perhaps the greatest strength of these films. They can present to us cinema that feels familiar and traditional in its cinematic language, and yet still be able to contribute to the present-day conversations about our personal and societal identities.
As progressive as we like to think the world is, I think that we still have a long way to go.